Welcome. Today we are looking at the 10 most valuable Marvel comics published in 1974. These are the most valuable comics and the biggest key issues. These are the books that collectors are always seeking out more than any others. These are the best long-term picks that have always been expensive, and they stay expensive, and they're all growing in price year by year. So let's get started. The number 10 most valuable Marvel comic of 1974 is Astonishing Tales number 25. This one featuring the first appearance of Deathlock, the Demolisher. And the backup story features George Perez's first comic book work. Unbelievably, there is a 9.9 graded copy of this book. This is one of the earliest Marvel keys that has a 9.9. And even more shockingly, there are 3 books in our top 10 today that all have a 9.9 copy. We're going to get to them all in a couple minutes here. On the CGC census, 1,609 copies graded so far, 78 9.6 or better, and Heritage has sold 91 copies in the last 2 decades. Here's the classic cover, 25-cent cover price. Overstreet price guide annual, not moving at all in lower grades, but a steady mover in higher grades raw. On the census, here's the 9.9, and there are 77 9.8s. And there's a rare UK price variant. There are only 5 copies graded in any condition. There's one graded a 9.2. The next most valuable book on our list, number 9, is Giant Size Creatures. Number 1, this features the first appearance of Tigra, who is formerly the Cat. Also, Werewolf by Night is in this story. This is a 50-cent giant-sized issue. 35 cent. Just before they jumped the price to 50 cents. And only 317 copies graded. Not too many on the top of the census either, only 32. Heritage has only ever sold 14 copies. Why is that? Because this has only become a major key in the last few years. So this was overlooked for many years. In low grade, just slight movement up. Higher grade, of course, doing better. There are 9 graded 9.8s. So generally, this is one of the scarcest books on our list. Number 8 most valuable comic of 1974 for Marvel is Savage Sword of Conan, number 1. Now this one is interesting. For 9.8 copies, this is actually the most common book on our list, and yet it's magazine size. And why is that? Because this is really the only book on our entire top 10 list that actually was an out-of-the-gate speculated title. Everybody hoarded this book as a hot release. Conan was super mega hot for Marvel in the early 70s, which is why he got his own magazine as well as his regular comic book series. Okay, this is the 133rd most valuable Marvel comic of the 1970s. One of the most valuable magazine format for sure. 485 copies graded, but 60 graded 9.6 or better. Heritage has now sold 110 copies. Very cool action cover. $1 cover price. So with inflation, that would make this over a $10 cover price now. Again, on the Overstreet annual price guide, no movement at all in the low grade, and very little movement even in the top grade. There's 809 copies graded. 162, I guess I had an error up there. 162 9.8s. And as I mentioned, that makes this basically the most common 9.8 book on our entire list, which is quite interesting. And Gil Kane worked in this. There's also Red Sonja in this issue. Number 7 most valuable of the year, Doctor Strange number 1. Why is this one worth so much? It's definitely not his first appearance, as he had been around already for 11 years. But this is his new ongoing series and its first official number 1 issue. And it's the first appearance of the Silver Dagger. It's the second Doctor Strange series under his own name, but a return of him after a 5-year break. Print run estimated at 105,000 copies. You can see, of course, due to Doctor Strange movies, demand and interest for this character has really jumped in the last few years. In the last decade, we can see incredibly, we've added 500% more copies graded. There's now 349 9.6s or better. Heritage 152 copies. It's a pretty cool sorcery cover there. And looking at the Overstreet price guide over the years, it's done very little movement in the last decade in low grade, but it has doubled in high grade. And on the census, 128 9.8s. So we're getting into the era where people are really starting to speculate. You might even say this is the first true year where the speculation is really starting to happen on these books. A lot of these books are now starting to surface more and more in high grades. Not necessarily 9.8s, but fairly high grade in general. And you have to remember another important thing, that back in this time, there was no such thing as a 9.8. There was no such thing as Near Mint Plus, really. The people who graded books basically said there was like good, fine, and mint. There were 3 grades. So as long as it looked pretty close to brand new, that was called a mint copy. And so a lot of these copies that might only grade a 9.0 now were classified as a mint back in the 1970s. Next on our list, number 6, Amazing Spider-Man, number 135. This is the second appearance of the Punisher. And you'll notice on the ranking here, you'll see it ranks 105th most valuable Marvel comic of the 1970s, and that's up a little bit from the year before. So this one is showing some movement upwards, which is good to see. Let's talk a little bit more about this book. Another thing to note about the Punisher, he's another character that appeared in 1974, but he wasn't an instant hit. His appearances didn't skyrocket in price right away. The Punisher really became a big name in the 80s. This is another one of the books on this list that actually has a 9.9 graded copy. And the print run estimated at 225,000 copies, because at this time Amazing Spider-Man was probably Marvel's best-selling title. 1,765 copies total graded, 158, Near Mint 9.6 or better, Heritage 100. Very nice cover, 25 cents. Again, in Overstreet, no movement in low grades, but the high grades are going up a bit. There is a 9.9 and there are 32 9.8s. So interestingly, in 9.8, this is one of the rarest books on our countdown today. And there is that Mexican edition that came out 5 months later, which also features second appearance of the Punisher and origin of the Tarantula. Only one copy graded at all, graded a 6.5. Number 5 on our list, book that gets a lot of talk about being part of the first trilogy of Wolverine appearances. And 182 does feature the second Wolverine cameo. This has been a pretty popular book ever since Wolverine got his own miniseries in the early 80s. So let's learn a little bit more about this one. It's the first appearance of Crackerjack Jackson and Hammer and Anvil. Herb Trimp cover and art. Print run estimated 200,000 copies originally. 2,500 copies graded, 160 super high grade, Heritage 162. Nice cover, blue background. Overstreet price guide, interesting to see how this book has not budged at all in low grade in the last 13 years. And it's not even doubled raw in high grade. But of course, lots of demand. So again, if you want more current prices, go to eBay, look up recent sales. And of course, for the graded copies, go to gpanalysis.com and learn more about what's happening in the market right now with the graded copies, which are, of course, really doing well at the moment. 49 9.8 on the census. Next book on our list is another book that really didn't take off as a major key until the 90s. And it is Marvel Premiere number 15, and it is the first appearance of Iron Fist. And as you know, Iron Fist a few years ago finally got his own TV series, which really propelled prices and interest up in this back in 2015. It's also the first appearance of Harold Meacham and the deaths of Wendell and Heather Rand, Gil Kane and Dick Giordano cover and art. And 3,300 copies graded, 295 super high grade, Heritage 168. Another classic cover now. And this is back when Kung Fu and all that was kind of in vogue in the mid-70s. No movement in low grade, no movement in high grade. It took a big jump right when the Netflix series debuted. And on the census, 72 9.8s. Notice there's also a Mexican edition with only one copy graded, and a more recent Netflix special edition with a bunch of 9.8s, because of course that's a newer comic. Next on our list, we're really getting into the big books of the year. Number 3 most valuable Marvel comic of 1974 is Incredible Hulk, number 180. Now, this has always been a big debate book. Is this the first appearance of Wolverine? Well, yes it is, but it's only a cameo. So some people don't like to count it as being the important book. Print run estimated 200,000 copies. And look at how the CG census has been going up like crazy. Almost 5,000 copies now, but only 188 9.6s. Surprisingly, these Hulks in super top grade are not super common. Heritage has sold 261 now. On the census over the last 17 years, you'll see that it's really started to move in the last 7. Otherwise, it was pretty well stalled in lower grades. Now finally it's starting to take off. It's gone up about 800% in high grade, and of course as this book approaches 50 years old, it's really starting to take off now. 49 9.8s of this book. Okay, well now we're getting into the two of the most valuable iconic Marvel comics of the 1970s. Number 2 is Amazing Spider-Man, number 129. And I want you to notice that this book took a long time to be considered of any value, because Spider-Man comics generally have such a high print run. This was never considered a key. And you'll see back in 1985, this book was already 11 years old, and it was still worth $2 in the price guide. But then he started getting all his series, and then the book skyrocketed. This was one of the big keys of the 90s, and it's been slowly moving up ever since, and now starting to skyrocket again. So, what can we tell you about this book? It's the Punisher's first appearance, of course. Also the first appearance of the Jackal, who would appear in the next 20 issues. Print run estimated at 225,000 copies. This is the number 2 comic of 1974. It's also the number 7 most valuable Marvel comic of the entire decade. This is a major key book. And look at the census. Over 11,000 copies have been sent in for grading, with 535 9.6s or better. Even Heritage has sold a whopping 564 copies. Classic cover, yellow background. This is iconic, one of the best Marvel covers ever. In the Overstreet annual price guide, we'll see that the book was moving really slow there for a decade, and then really started to move. So even in low grade, this book has gone up over 500%. And then again in high grade, surprisingly, hasn't gone up as fast as the low grades, because this book is such a key. All conditions are in demand. But it's definitely moving now. On the census, we have 143 9.8s. And then look at how many copies after that. There's 1,000 9s, 1,100 8.5s, 1,100 8s. It's just crazy how many copies have been graded, because this is a major key and it's got a big future ahead of itself. In fact, this book is so popular, people are really hunting out rare variants from other countries. We've got a Brazilian, a Mexican, a Dutch, Italian, and a French-Canadian version have all been graded. People are hunting these out and collecting them all. I've seen numerous collectors doing that. So again, not a hard book to find at all, but took a long time to become a key. And the number 1 most valuable Marvel comic with a cover date in 1974, of course, is Incredible Hulk, number 181, featuring the first appearance of Wolverine. Now, I published a video a decade ago, which got surprising results when people watch it now, because they can't believe the statements I made. But at one time, I said, don't buy this book. It's not a good investment. It's not moving at all. And I'm going to show you that here in just a moment. So, this is the most valuable regular release comic book for Marvel of the last 50 years. That means not counting any exclusive variants, ratio variants, price variants, anything like that. So this is the book to have. There is one copy graded 9.9. Unbelievable. And what else can we tell you? Print run 200,000 copies. Again, look at the census. It's gone crazy in the last decade, how much it's jumped. 11,000 copies graded, 456 super high grade copies, and Heritage reaching 500 copies of this iconic cover, the first cover appearance of Wolverine, and red background on this 20-cent book. In the Overstreet annual price guide, we'll see that it, here's what I was talking about. At one time, check out these prices. For a long time, it wasn't moving at all. And in fact, there's a market correction. In 2011 and 2012, the book was falling in price. Hard to believe, because look where it's gone since. So it was really 2014 it really started to take off, and I think it's not going to stop at all now. This book is guaranteed. It's the key Marvel book of the 1970s. Low grade is now moving up fast, and this is for raw copies. High grade, of course, breaking records for a book of this age, considering how common it actually is. There's a lot of copies out there. And on the census, again, we have the 9.9 one copy, and then 126 9.8s. A fascinating list. Let's do a little comparison of the CGC census for these 10 major books. See if we can point out a couple things. So as I said, there are 3 books with a 9.9, which is really cool. But after that, Amazing Spider-Man 135 only has 32 9.8s, and Giant Sized Creatures #1 only has 9 9.8s. Those are the rarest books on this list for the top grades. Looking at the census in total, Amazing Spider-Man 129 actually has the most copies graded, 11,617. And then Giant Sized Creatures at the bottom end, only 317 copies graded, period, in all conditions. It's just there's not that many graded at all. So that's interesting. Anything else I can point out quick? Well, I mentioned earlier that really only Savage Sword of Conan #1 was only the really book on this list that was an instant speculator investing hit right from the day it was released. People were hoarding this book. But almost every other comic on this list took a decade or even 2 decades before collectors started really treating it as a key issue and the prices started going up. So lots of fascinating things happening here in collecting Marvel Comics from 1974. I'd like to thank you for watching this. We're doing a year every week, educating you on the most important books of each year and their rarity and their value, so you can compare them and find which books are undervalued and just what's going on with the market. Of course, you can read more about this in the books that I write called Investing in Comic Books. You can order those at my website, terryhoknes.com. And of course, go to CBSI website, comicbookinvest.com, to learn tons more about comic book collecting tips. Thanks for watching.